Name and title first, please.
Scott Irwin, Professor of Agricultural Economics, University of Illinois.
What was the auspices behind this lengthy report?
And lengthy it was, Todd. It represented about 18 months of work by myself, Darrell Good, and Dwight Sanders of Southern Illinois University. And we were approached by Joe Glauber, the chief economist of the USDA, almost 2 years ago, in the midst of ongoing concerns about the accuracy of various USDA supply and demand estimates in the grain markets, and asked us if we'd be interested in putting together a research project that would take a look and try to dig down and figure out where and why any problems might have surfaced.
In general, did you find anything?
Interestingly enough, not really much in terms of the yield and production forecasts. We found some evidence that the NASS survey-based yield estimates for soybeans might have a creeping tendency towards a conservative bias early in the season, but that's fairly recent, and kind of you could quibble about whether that's really substantially biased or not. But overall, the yield forecasts come out looking quite good based on our analysis. The really big part of the report, and where people's main concerns have been, is with USDA stock estimates in corn. And undoubtedly, at least measured against what people in the market were expecting before the reports were released, starting in 2006, there's been a major shift in that.
The grain stocks report is very objective in the way it gathers its information. More than, if I recall correctly, 9,000 sites that report back in. Is it accurate?
I think it turns out it's a complicated question to answer. Is it accurate? Let me step back and say, when you're looking at yield and production estimates from the USDA, say you take their August forecasts, which are always big numbers when they come out in August. Well, then you eventually get the January numbers, which most people regard as very close to the true final yield and crop size, so you get a comparison. With the stocks estimate, you get one number. They do a survey as of, say, March 1st, June 1st, Sep 1, and so on, and that's it. So how do you ever say they were accurate or not when there's never something further down the line that allows you to assess the degree of accuracy? So we have to, in stocks, really step back and take a second kind of look at accuracy, which is, okay, are they surprising people more now than they did in the past, as an indicator that maybe something has changed with regard to the accuracy of those estimates?
And are they?
And something definitely happened after 2006, in the sense that if you look at the gap between what the marketplace was expecting before corn stocks estimates, before and after 2006, it is a very clearly something happened. The volatility of that difference is about twice as big after 2006 as compared to before.
The only thing that really changed in the marketplace was that ethanol was put in as additional usage, primary usage, for corn.
And that's been a lot of discussion about, well, how could that be connected to these apparent problems in the grain stocks estimates? Clearly, that was a major change during this time period, but was that just coincidental, or was it somehow behind the scenes connected to some kind of errors that might have been creeping into the report?
Did you come to any conclusions?
We did. Our conclusion was that the most likely explanation for the issues that have arisen with the corn stocks estimates was something we call unresolved sampling errors in the final estimates. So that's obviously a real mouthful. What it simply means is that in corn, when you get the January estimate, just like we did a few weeks ago for the 2013 crop, it's a number. Say it's 14 million bushels. Most people treat that as if that was the exact number of bushels that the United States grew, say, in 2013. Whereas in reality, and the USDA also always carefully acknowledges this, there is sampling error because they don't ask everybody. They take a sample, even though it's a huge one in December to get that number. And so there's going to be some kind of a normal error in that number. And what happens is then as you go through the year, if you just happen to get a year where the sampling error in that January number was unusually large, that can make it very hard to anticipate stock numbers the rest of the year.
You should be able to figure out whether that's happened very often in the past, because there are mileposts where USDA has changed the previous year's or a previous year's total production.
Interesting, but only for soybeans, not corn. Only soybeans, and there's a good reason for that. In soybeans, we have what we would call a fairly complete accounting for usage. In other words, we have reports that come out that allow at the end of the marketing year to add up and get a pretty good estimate of domestic crush and exports. So the process works like this in soybeans. The USDA produces their January estimate of production, that's a quote-unquote final, in the middle of a marketing year. And then you know what the stocks were at the beginning of the year, that's total supply. And then you get to the end of the marketing year, and you have these other reports that allow you to say, okay, we used this much. And so you can, and then we also get a stocks report at the end of the marketing year on September 1st. And so you can take the beginning stocks plus production minus the use numbers from those reports and determine what the final stocks number should be. Well, what if the stocks number that the USDA gets in their September 1 count is 200 million bushels higher than you get from the arithmetic I just described? Well, the answer is that means you must have underestimated the crop in January by 200 million bushels.
And USDA generally will add those all together and subtract or add to the previous year's crop. And they have that built into their system as a warning.
And they do that almost every year. The USDA adjusts the previous year's final crop estimate for soybeans based on exactly that calculation in the September stocks report that comes out after the end of the marketing year. And so in the soybean market, those sampling errors in the January production estimates, they get resolved at the end of the year. There's a milepost, like you say. That's a good way of describing it. Here's the problem in corn. We have good measurements of our industrial uses, like ethanol, and food uses. And we have good measurements of exports, but we have no independent measurement of feed usage. That's why it's called feed and residual on the balance sheet. And so even though we know that there are likely the same kind of sampling errors every year in the January corn production estimate, just like they're revealed in soybeans, we have no way of fixing them. And our argument is that in the years that had the most problematic stocks reports, which our analysis indicated were 2009, 2010, and the 2012 crop years, that the most likely explanation is they just happened to be years when that January estimate was unusually too high or too low. And it was hard for the market to figure that out, knowing that you never get a way to reconcile it at the end of the year.
It would seem that it would be easy enough, with the limited number of very large players in the livestock industry, to get an accounting of how much grain was consumed on an animal unit basis or something along those lines, because most of the large players actually have several different types of animal units they're using. What kinds of recommendations have you made, if any?
Right. Well, this problem has been around for as long as the USDA has been estimating corn balance sheets and production. So it's been around for a long time. The idea of some kind of feed survey has also been around for a long time. And it turns out that even today, with the consolidation that you mentioned, which is certainly real, Todd, it would be a very complex thing to do, and I should add, very expensive to do a complete survey of corn feed use. There's just such a variety of end users. But we think that you could do some kind of survey of, like you said, the larger operations and different species, and if you could develop a pretty good series on their feed use and feed use per animal, that might then give you stable enough relationships between their use and total feed use over time that it might give the USDA a tool to go back and adjust the production estimates once you get the final stocks number, like you do in soybeans. So we recommended that the USDA take a really serious look at whether that kind of additional survey-based report would be worth the extra cost.
Did you make other recommendations?
Yeah, we made a whole series of various recommendations. For example, in the earliest season reports that come out of the World Agricultural Outlook Board, we found that there's a fair degree of confusion on the part of market analysts and market participants about exactly how do they construct those yield forecasts that are published in May, June, and July. And so we encouraged them to develop basically a guide to how they make those forecasts and have it prominently displayed. We thought that NASS should also take a look at their process for forecasting soybeans and see if they agree with us that there might be a creeping conservative bias and if anything could be done to address that. And we also made some other recommendations for NASS, which does the survey-based yield forecasting. One we called opening up the black box, making that process more transparent, we think would be helpful. And also, this is a bit longer term. We recommended that NASS begin some research to figure out how they might make good use in the future of the data streams that are already available and are going to clearly become even increasingly more available right off the combine in terms of measuring yields, that this is going to be an important issue for them to grapple with.